It was the last day of 7th grade, a day that should have been marked by celebrations and joyful farewells. My friend Sophia and I were in the midst of the closing party when a rather audacious idea struck us. Our school, a majestic building with decades of history, had areas that, to any curious student's eyes, seemed shrouded in mysteries and urban legends. Parts of the building had been abandoned for years, hiding corridors and rooms few dared to explore. The party, filled with laughter and loud music, wasn't enough to quench our thirst for adventure. Sophia, always the more daring one, grabbed my arm, whispering about exploring the school's forgotten areas. I hesitated, feeling a twinge of fear and excitement, but the adrenaline from Sophia's proposal eventually convinced me. Our plan was interrupted by a janitor I had never seen before. He was a tall man with tired eyes and an enigmatic smile. He told us about a secret room that students weren't allowed to access. The offer was too tempting to ignore, so despite the suspicious glances we exchanged, we decided to follow the man. He led us through the familiar corridors of the school to a door leading to an old, deserted wing. The smell of mold and the silence starkly contrasted with the noise and joy of the party we had left behind. As we moved forward, a sense of discomfort began to grow inside me. I looked at Sophia, searching for any sign that we should turn back, but she was mesmerized, completely oblivious to the fear starting to settle in my heart. The janitor finally stopped in front of an old door, hidden behind a bookshelf in the library. With a noisy keyring, he opened the door, revealing a small, dusty room filled with boxes and furniture covered with tarpaulins. Before we could understand what was happening, he quickly turned, pushed me inside, and locked the door. Desperation took over me as I banged on the door and screamed for help, but the sound of my voice seemed consumed by the thickness of the walls. Sophia, who had luckily stayed outside, ran to get help. Alone, fear began to suffocate me as the reality of my situation became terrifyingly clear. The darkness of the room secretly nestled behind the library seemed to swallow every fragment of light that tried to infiltrate under the door. Inside, the air was heavy, laden with the smell of old paper and the mold of forgotten memories. I was alone, feeling each heartbeat like thunder echoing in the oppressive silence. Groping around, I found a small window, so high and dirty that it did little more than suggest daylight outside. My first thought was of escape, but the window was out of reach, and even if I could reach it, I doubted I could open it. Panic began to mix with frustrated anger. How could Sophia and I have been so careless? How could we have trusted that man we barely knew? As the reality of my confinement deepened, my thoughts turned to Sophia. I desperately hoped she had found someone, that she hadn't been captured or worse. The minutes dragged on, each second a sharp reminder of the danger still out there. Then the noises started, small scratches and pops coming from somewhere within the walls. At first, I thought it was my imagination, fueled by fear and anxiety. But they persisted, growing in volume and frequency. Something or someone was moving out there, or perhaps, I feared, within the same walls that confined me. My mind began to imagine terrible scenarios. Did the janitor have other intentions? Was I part of a more sinister plan? The stories of former employees and unresolved disputes, which we sometimes whispered in the hallways, now came back to my mind, each more macabre than the last. Then I heard footsteps. Slow and deliberate, they seemed to be coming my way. I covered my mouth with my hands to muffle my cries. The sound of the footsteps increased until it stopped. There was a pause that seemed like an eternity. Then the doorknob began to turn. My heart stopped. I retreated to the farthest corner, waiting for the worst. When the doorknob turned completely, my eyes were fixed on the thin line of light that expanded as the door slowly opened. My body was tense, prepared to run or fight, despite knowing that my chances were minimal. The light from the corridor flooded the darkness like a wave, revealing the figure standing in the doorway. For a moment, my heart skipped with the hope that it was Sophia or one of the teachers coming to save me. But it wasn't. It was him, the janitor, with his crooked smile and eyes hiding a wicked gleam. However, something in his posture indicated hesitation. He was holding a key in his hand, nervously playing with it between his fingers. "You shouldn't be here," he said with his rough voice. This was supposed to be just a warning, a lesson. I didn't understand his words at that moment. A lesson. He took a step forward, the key still dangling in his hand. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. You were just supposed to see and leave." But she ran. And now here we are. Before he could advance further, I heard another sound coming from the corridor. Rapid footsteps. The janitor turned sharply, his attention diverted from the dark room to the new threat approaching. It was Sophia, running down the hall, accompanied by one of the younger teachers, Mr. Lopez, who taught science. The janitor's face paled, the reality of his situation clearly registering. He tried to speak, perhaps to explain or plead, but Mr. Lopez was not interested in listening. Passing him quickly, the teacher entered the room, his eyes searching for mine. "Sophia told us everything," he said, checking quickly to see if I was all right before turning to the janitor. "You are under arrest now. The police are on their way." As the janitor was escorted out, Sophia hugged me tightly, whispering apologies and promises that we would never separate in situations like this again. The adrenaline began to subside, leaving in its place a deep tiredness and an even greater relief. The school administration faced several difficult questions. How had the janitor, a former employee who had been dismissed years ago over disagreements with the management, managed to enter and remain in the school undetected? Security measures were reviewed and reinforced, and the school promised that such oversights would never happen again. I started my last semester at university with the usual lukewarm enthusiasm, until I met Clara. She was one of the new faces in the literature class, a girl who radiated contagious energy and had a smile that seemed to brighten even the dimmest and most monotonous rooms. We quickly became close, especially because we shared a voracious passion for classic writers and modern narrative theories. Clara had a way of understanding literature that fascinated me. She didn't just read. She absorbed every word, every comma, fervently discussing characters' motivations and authors' stylistic choices. During breaks between classes, we would spend hours in the library, surrounded by piles of books and notes. She became a constant presence in my academic life and, in a way, a safe harbor in the chaos of those final course months. In that last week of classes, she introduced me to a study group that met at her house. "It will be a night of studying and perhaps a bit of fun," she said with a sparkle in her eyes that I couldn't interpret at the time. However, I felt a strange hesitation. Maybe it was the fear of commitment or simply the instinct to preserve my personal space, but I declined the invitation, making up an excuse about an unavoidable family commitment. As the end of the semester approached, I noticed a subtle change in her behavior. Clara, who had always been vibrant and welcoming, began to show signs of possessiveness, asking probing questions about where I would be and with whom, and why I couldn't just cancel other commitments to be with the group. It was uncomfortable, and I found myself avoiding her more often than I'd like to admit. I had no idea that my attempt to distance myself would trigger a series of events that would make me question not just our friendship, but also my own safety within that campus I loved so much. As Clara's messages became more frequent and her calls more insistent, I began to feel an anxiety I couldn't explain. She wanted to know why I was distancing myself, why I had lied about the family commitment. Trying to stay calm, I made up more excuses, trying to preserve a friendship that was already beginning to feel like a trap. It was on a Wednesday, after another day of avoiding her at the university, that I received the first photo. It was a simple yet disturbing image, a photo of the entrance to my building, taken from an angle that suggested the person was hiding. There was no message, just the image. My heart raced, my breathing became heavy. I immediately called Clara, who answered after the first ring. "Clara, are you taking pictures of me? This is very invasive." The accusation came out more aggressive than I intended, but fear had taken hold of me. She laughed, a sound that lacked any warmth I knew. "Don't play the victim. You're not being honest with me, so why should I be with you?" Her voice was calm, but there was a threatening tone I had never noticed before. In the following days, the photos continued to arrive, each more invasive. Images of my bedroom window at night, photos of me on campus looking over my shoulder, visibly disturbed. Each new photo was a blow to my sense of security, a cruel invasion that left me paralyzed with fear. I tried to confront her again, but Clara only denied any involvement, though always with a smile that seemed to hide more than it revealed. The situation escalated until one day, returning home, I found a note on my door, written with letters cut out of magazines. "Why are you running away from me?" That night, I barely slept, the strange sounds outside making me jump out of bed, the wind through the curtains making me fear that she might be out there, watching. I was cornered, knowing I needed to take action, but fearing what a direct confrontation might trigger. The situation reached a climax on a cold December night. It was past 11 when I heard loud knocks on my apartment door. My heart raced, and for a moment, I hesitated, afraid to open and face whatever my imagination had been drawing in recent days. However, the persistence of the knocks only increased, accompanied by a voice I would recognize anywhere. "Open the door, please. We need to talk." It was Clara. Her voice sounded different. Desperate, perhaps, or just tired. I don't know what led me to unlock the door. Maybe curiosity or the desire to end it all. She entered quickly, her eyes red and hair disheveled, as if she had run there. Without giving me time to react, she began to speak, her words pouring out in a frenetic stream. "I just wanted you to understand, to see how similar we are, how much we could share. But you avoided me, lied to me. Why can't you just accept me?" As she spoke, she took something out of her bag. It was a camera. My stomach turned as I saw the object that had probably captured all those invasive photos. "I just took some pictures, to show you that I'm always around, that I care." She tried to approach, holding the camera as if it were a gift. I backed away, my mind scrambling to find a way out of the situation that was becoming increasingly threatening. "Clara, this isn't normal, you need help," I managed to say, my voice breaking mid-sentence. She stopped suddenly, as if my words had physically hit her. Then, with a movement too quick for me to react, she advanced toward me, the camera raised as if she wanted to photograph me up close, invade the last space I had left. The adrenaline made me react. I fought to take the camera from her, and in the midst of our struggle, we both fell. The impact was strong, and for a second, all I could hear was our panting breaths. Clara finally let go of the camera, and I ran out of the apartment, screaming for help. Minutes later, with the campus security and some neighbors around me, I felt I could finally breathe. Clara was restrained and, after much hesitation, agreed to seek professional help. It was a rainy June afternoon, and the last day of school should have been a day of celebration for us. 5 friends united since elementary school. With our plans to dive into the water park thwarted by a storm, a bold and somewhat reckless idea emerged to satisfy our desire for adventure. Explore an old orphanage in the city, famous among urban legends as a haunted place. The building had been abandoned for over a decade, and rumors about it were as dense as the vines covering its stone facade. I have always been fascinated by the unknown, and this curiosity often put me in the lead when it came to adventures. Accompanied by 4 friends, all between 17 and 18 years old, we set off for the orphanage with a mix of excitement and nervousness. The rain fell incessantly, creating a curtain of droplets that distorted the already gloomy view of the large building. The place was a colossus of bricks and wood, with windows that looked like empty eyes watching every move we made. The iron gate, corroded by time, creaked under our hands as we pushed it, taking our first steps into that forgotten history. The atmosphere inside the orphanage was heavy, the air laden with the smell of mold and untold stories. The long corridors stretched like mazes, with doors leading to rooms that still held the echoes of the children who once played there. Faded toys, torn books, and small clothes scattered as if life had been abruptly paused there. As we explored, the crackle of our steps on the wooden floor competed with the sound of the rain outside, but other noises began to infiltrate our ears. Almost imperceptible whispers, distant footsteps echoing in the corridors above, and the occasional crack of something breaking. What started as an adventure soon turned into something more sinister, as we realized we were not alone. That feeling of being watched, that each of our movements was followed by eyes we could not see, grew with every room we left behind. As the afternoon turned into dusk, the light entering through the broken windows was no longer sufficient to illuminate the dark corridors. Marco, the most skeptical among us, tried to maintain the mood with nervous jokes, but even his voice began to falter as the grim environment of the orphanage deepened. In one of the rooms, we found a wall covered in children's drawings, colorful scenes of happier days contrasting with the grim reality of the place. Anna, who always had a more sensitive heart, ran her fingers over the drawings, murmuring about how sad it was that a place filled with so much life had become so forgotten and gloomy. It was then that we heard the first clear and unmistakable noise that could not be attributed to any of us or the old structure of the building. A low sob, almost as if a child were crying somewhere nearby. The sound made our blood run cold. Our glances crossed, a mix of fear and silent questioning about whether we should investigate. We decided to follow the sound, guided by curiosity that still fought against the growing fear. As we approached the source of the sobbing, the temperature seemed to drop, and our flashlights captured only pieces of shadows that moved in almost human forms. We reached a partially open door from which the sound seemed to emanate. With a confirming look among us, I took a deep breath and pushed the door open with trembling hands. The room was empty, except for an old doll sitting against the opposite wall. Its glass eyes seemed to look directly at us, and the sobbing had stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The sensation of terror grew, a physical pressure in the air around us. When we turned to leave the room, the door slammed shut, plunging us into complete darkness. We then heard the sound of something dragging across the floor, slowly approaching us. The fear was palpable, each of us breathing heavily, unable to see what surrounded us, just hearing that threatening sound coming our way. With the door resisting all efforts to open it and the oppressive silence filling the room, terror took deep root in us. When the dragging sound suddenly ceased, a faint light began to filter in, not from an external source, but as if emanating from some point within the room itself. The dim light revealed the doll still sitting against the wall, but now, somehow, its presence seemed even more menacing, its glass eyes capturing the light in a way that seemed almost alive. The instinct for survival overcame the paralyzing fear. In a collective, wordless movement, One of us grabbed a piece of broken wood from the floor and hurled it at the window. The glass shattered, bringing the loud sound of the storm into the room, breaking the macabre spell that seemed to hold us. Without hesitation, we all ran toward the broken opening, helping each other climb through the shards of glass and damaged structure, hurried by the fear that the dragging sound might resume at any moment. Once outside under the heavy rain, we did not stop to look back. The run to the car was a blur of adrenaline and rain, with each of us driven by the urgent need to leave that place behind. In the car, as we drove away, the orphanage became just a dark silhouette against the darkening sky. The feeling that we were leaving something terrible behind seemed to follow us. A few months later, that place was demolished, but surely that day we had more adventure than a trip on the last day of school could bring.